Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
I appreciate you being back with us, and she is back with us. She's an autism advocate and director of the Mom Kind, helping out parents everywhere. But you know what? We don't just help out parents. We help out people in general and children as well. And she's Alicia Trautwein. Hey, Alicia, how you doing?
Great. How are you today?
Doing fantastic. Fantastic. So we've talked about a whole bunch of different things, from autism to ADHD, which, by the way, all of those things that you can help people with when they go to your website. They can learn more about your services. But we've never really dug deep into anxiety, which is so prevalent right now, especially with COVID, people coming out of the heavy COVID situation. Can we talk a lot about anxiety today?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you know what? It's the driver or one of the issues that are associated with so many other things. And that could be autism, that could be ADHD and many other things. But, when you talk about anxiety, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when somebody says, yeah, I'm very anxious. It's hard for me to focus on things. I'm always thinking about the future.
Yeah, for me, I honestly think more of a lack of control, because one of the things is we can control our environment in so many ways, but there are things that we really can't control. And I think a lot of that really starts to eventually affect everyone, because they're trying their best to control everything, to whether, especially with women, it's managing the home, it's, going to work full time, it's having, if you have children, you're managing their schedules, and you're trying to incorporate all of this, and you don't have to have any other diagnosis to wind up with, having anxiety. And sometimes it more is a developmental thing that, over time, going through, whether it's trauma or living in survival mode, that you can develop anxiety. And one of those things is it doesn't just show up one day. It's something that's building in you, that you're slowly getting more anxious and having all these different things going on. And then suddenly you realize, okay, this is too much, but it doesn't just hit all at once. It's a big struggle for a lot of people.
You mentioned women, and at least in my circles, I know many, many, many more women that suffer from anxiety, and they admit it, and they're on medications, easily half a dozen. Top of my head, I can name them. I can't name any guys. Now, that doesn't mean they're not dealing with it. They're just not talking about it.
Well, exactly. And, and I think that there are different factors, obviously, genetically too, that some people are more predispositioned, but I think that there is still such a role put on women that, it's kind of, it's both worlds. It's the traditional role we originally had, in society's, view of what we were supposed to be, combined with being completely self-sufficient, working full time, running businesses, running households at the same time. And there's so much extra going on that it's no wonder that women are having struggles with mental health. It's just because there's just so much on our plates.
Yep. So what's your first thought when somebody comes to you, or let's say they reach out to you on your website and they say, hey, one of the things I'm dealing with a lot of anxiety. What's your first thought for them?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's also breaking it down, because there's a lot more to anxiety than just worrying. I know that that's kind of one of our go-to thoughts when we think of anxiety, but especially in women, it can look obviously different than men, just because how we present things, right? Like just everything else. And so, I mean, obviously there's excessive fear and worrying, but there's also the irritability or changes in your behavior, just, avoiding things because you do have anxiety. And so looking at the bigger picture really helps to kind of bring that down, because yes, there are medications, but there's also environmental things that you can work on. And I've seen there's also when it comes to anxiety in women, I mean, there's there's difficulties focusing and feeling restless and muscle tension and fatigue and even hot flashes and difficulty falling asleep. That all, can be from anxiety, because anxiety affects not just your brain, but your whole body.
Totally. And you just nailed something right there. If you're not getting enough sleep because, let's say, you're thinking about things and you just can't fall asleep, all you're doing, and it's not your fault, all you're doing is making it worse for the next day in terms of your level of anxiety.
Yeah, and it's hard because it is a cycle because like you're not sleeping, then the next day you're trying to run on little sleep. But the chances are if you're not sleeping during last night, you're probably gonna have problems sleeping tonight too.
It's a cycle. So where do you go with that? I mean, certainly we talk about changing the environmental situation. Let's say your job is stressful. Maybe you need to get there a little bit earlier if you can to just kind of get into your day, get stuff out of the way. Short of the environmental challenges, then medication, I guess, would be the next answer.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong. You and I have had this conversation before too. There's nothing wrong with medication. And honestly, if you're at a point where the anxiety is unbearable, reach out to a doctor first, by all means, because it's in order to get to where you can change those environmental things, change the things that around you that are contributing to more anxiety. You need to be at a level that you can handle. And so there's nothing wrong with calling up the doctor, getting on a call. I mean, a lot of times now, you can get on a virtual appointment for anxiety because that's not something the doctor has to like check you out, your blood pressure, anything like that. Like just talking about your symptoms, especially a doctor that knows you, it's been through your physical health. They can a lot of times help you out with basic medication through a virtual call.
So let's look at the difference between, or the connection between, depression and anxiety.
Yeah, so obviously there is still a difference, but they say that up to 2/3 of the symptoms of both anxiety and depression overlap. So if you think of kind of like a Venn diagram, that would give you like, the concept that it all overlaps. So a lot of the symptoms, like there's going to be more of a area that you're going to fall into. So obviously we're dealing more anxiety versus more depression. That said, a lot of the medications and the treatments, natural treatments, therapy, things like that, they're the same thing.
So, okay, let me make sure I have that clear. So the medication for anxiety or depression, a lot of times the medication is the same.
Yeah, a lot of the starting medication. Now, obviously, if you are more on the depression side, there are stronger medications. There's different ones that are more focused on that because the point of, with depression, it's bringing you up to a baseline. But there are a lot of like the very starting medications that are prescribed, the very low dose things, escitalopram, I think that's the generic version. It's prescribed as either anxiety or depression for a very small level. I know 2 of my children and even my husband take that in very small doses just to help anxiety. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't take it away. It just brings it down.
Helps you manage it better. Right.
Because you have to be able to be in a state of mind to make any changes in your life and to learn coping skills, things like that. And then honestly, a lot of people, they have both. And there's nothing wrong with that because that's, it happens because if you're going through a constant state of anxiety, it's going to lead to depression as well. And sometimes it's just how our brains are, done in general, that we're just kind of already, in a predisposition to develop anxiety and depression.
I've heard some people have taken different medications or two at the same time. Like, for example, maybe they would take, Wellbutrin, hypothetically for depression, but then sometimes that brings you down and that you're at a state where you can't focus. So then it might be, or actually Cymbalta first and then Wellbutrin to kind of bring you up.
Yeah.
And
that happens. And doctors prefer not to have to do that because that puts you kind of in an inevitable cycle of medications.
Yep.
They don't want you to have to, obviously your body have to rely on that, but sometimes it has to happen. Sometimes in order to get somebody to the state that they need to be able to take the medications that their body will, accept, because not every person's body is going to accept the same medications. That's just not how it works. And sometimes, like you said, you have something like Cymbalta that's going to help you sleep. It's going to help with depression, anxiety, but then sometimes it does bring you too low and you're not waking up properly during the day and you need something in the morning to bring your mood back up to a base level.
Yep.
I see that a lot in when you have bipolar disorder, things like that. Unfortunately, that's very common medication wise that will happen because you have an antipsychotic and sometimes that, while it helps a lot of the symptoms, it does take that baseline away to where it's either you're going too far depressed or too hyper sometimes.
You know a lot about this, and it's amazing but you do. And that's why you're so effective at what you do in helping people with all different situations. Before we even continue, if somebody's listening and they want to reach out to you, why don't you give them your website and some other details, how they can connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is themomkind.com, and there is just ample amount of information on there. One, just to even just type in the search bar or any of the labels at the top of the page to find on anything, anxiety, depression, mental health, but also just healthy living. So you have that to get go. But if you want to connect with me, I am a life coach. So I do life coaching sessions. That's on the webpage, as well as that little Facebook pop-up in the corner. It's kind of my favorite tool because I've seen so many people using it lately. And you just get on there and you message me and ask me your questions, because sometimes the questions, they're not really complicated. I mean, but they make such a difference. Sometimes the answer is so simple, but no one's told them.
Mm-hmm. Or it just confirms. You just want I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I'm not 100% sure. And I want somebody I'm going to bounce it off somebody who knows.
Yeah, exactly. And, like I've had parents, one thing that, we have an article, I have an article up on the site. It's about getting diapers for children with autism or even adults with autism that, have bladder issues. And this really affects, anybody who has someone who's past the baby stage even, but especially if they have an autism diagnosis, Medicaid will cover the diapers. But no one knows this. No one thinks to do it because they're working with their child and they're just, keep buying pull-ups and they go to the next stage and whatnot. They don't realize it. And so, but the article's about Medicaid. So they don't know, they don't always think about, well, does that mean most insurances will? And so I'll have parents reach out and I'm like, hey, the brand that, sponsored this post, they genuinely are a good company. That's why I worked with them and said, they do everything for you. They really do. They because they are the supplier, they will call the insurance and put your insurance. They'll call the doctor to get the referral for you. And then they'll send the supplies out to you. And it's no extra charge because they're the ones with the supplies, so that they have a vested interest.
Absolutely. They want to sell. So.
Right. And they're wanting it to go through insurance because the insurance is going to pay for it. It gets the client what they need, either free or very low cost. So they're willing to do it, but no one knows that's out there because you don't think about it.
Why don't we go down that road right here? Can we talk about things? And we do have a question and some feedback. We're going to get to that in just a second. But now that we've turned the car, so to speak, in a different road.
We're down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, and it's a cool direction we went into. Things that are covered by insurance that you might not think.
Yeah. So, okay, the best one that was covered, I can tell you this, that was covered by my kids' Medicaid, because we have, actually, I'll start with this. First, every state has a program. Now, it varies on who, how much coverage, different levels of income, stuff like that. But if you have Medicaid and your work offers insurance, that they're likely to pay for your work insurance as well as the Medicaid, because the costs are cheaper on them to have the work insurance pay for everything else.
Okay, pause.
Mm-hmm.
I got to hear this again. Go.
Okay, so here, I'm not going to type it in so I can actually pull it up.
Sure.
So because I want to describe it the best way I can, because, okay, so it's called the HIP in Missouri, okay? It's Health Insurance Premium Payment Program. And we use this for our kids, and it's actually incredible, well and above what you think of on it, because Medicaid covers stuff at pretty much no cost. However, there's limited doctors that take it.
Right.
And then, wait lists are longer because, everybody with Medicaid trying to do it. Now, Medicaid covers a lot. You can get pretty high up there on even income levels and still even be able to pay for Medicaid when it comes to children.
Mm-hmm.
When you have disabilities, you can get it automatically. But a lot of times work insurance can be so much better. So what they do is it's a program that pays the cost of health insurance premiums for certain health, low health net participants. It covers the purchase of the health insurance for eligible patients or participants when it's determined to be cost effective. So, for example, especially when my son was younger, he was going to therapy 3 times a week. he had probably 3 to 4 doctor visits, different doctors and specialists that he'd have to see. There was, medication that he had. There was lab testing. There was all these different factors. And that's a lot. Like when you're talking about what's billed to the insurer sometimes, that's a lot of money. So for the insurance, what they do, they look at it, they look at what your employer offers. And they say, is it cheaper for us to pay for the employer versus what we're paying for the services? And if it is more cost effective going to the employer, they cover your health insurance premiums. And what's really cool about that, there's something even crazier about that. So when it comes to health insurance premiums, right, you think about this at work, there's about 3 plans. You have individual, take a minute, individual, they really have 3, individual and children, and individual and family. And there's typically no gap in that, right?
Or
sometimes
they're also like individual and spouse, and then
there's a spouse one.
Okay.
Right, but in order to have your family to have the kids covered, typically it's just the whole family, right?
Right.
Okay, they can't separate the cost per person, so they literally cover the entire premium.
Wow.
So they cover your insurance as well as your children's because they can't separate that.
So Medicaid is paying,
which is really cool.
Your let's say you get insurance from your job, and your job pays part of it. In my situation, it's always been they pay that much of it and that much of it. So Medicaid in your situation, or at least in your state, and it's definitely worth checking into, will pay your full job insurance premium.
Yeah. And then what makes it even better, the kids continue to have Medicaid. And then what happens is it's billed second. So you get your work insurance first, then Medicaid. And so work insurance covers most everything. And then pretty much most everything left over, so which is typically a copay, Medicaid covers that still.
This is why we do what we do, because nobody would have known that.
And I didn't know that and realistically, you're supposed to be told this, but they're not. And it's just because there's not enough people to get the information out, right? I was shocked when I was flipping through my husband's stuff and we were picking out the insurance, what plans we were looking at, because I knew going into what plans we were buying that I need to pick one that would cover cost effectively for your HIP program.
Sure.
And he works for FedEx, and it covers all the branches. It's all the same insurance. They actually had a pamphlet in the back that had the list of the program for every state to contact to see if you qualified. But that's the first employer I've ever heard of. Like, I'm sure there's other employers that do it, but people don't think about it. There's also so much paperwork you're given when you're flipping through insurance. A lot of people are like, I'll take the cheapest plan, or whatever the case may be. They don't go flipping through it like I did because I have to go through it all knowing this. But people don't realize it. So the information is out there, but it's not known.
And it's so worth checking into. And I get it. We're all so busy. And then you get that, that folder, let's say from work, and you got the PPO, the EPO, the blah, 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 the orange, not the orange, the gold, the bronze, the, all platinum. It's so confusing. What I did a couple of months ago, I removed my kids from my work supplied insurance and put them on what's called Child Health Plus. That's in the New York area.
Yeah, it's the same as ours. They call it the CHIP program.
Okay.
A long time. That's what they initially had. Yeah.
Just by doing that, just for 2 kids, I saved about $600 a month. And so you might actually qualify for next year when your thing goes up. You might be able to qualify for it, depending on your kids' needs. Sure.
But yeah, it's crazy because like if they qualify for any of the state-run insurances, which are not a bad thing because they're getting better about who they cover. They're trying to cover as many kids as they can. If they're qualified for that, then there's a chance they're going to cover the work insurance.
Well,
that is the craziest part that I've seen covered just in general. There is other things like horse therapy, like we talked about the diapers, all different supplies. But yeah, the fact that they cover it, and for us, we just submit a paycheck every week when it comes in. I send it over. I actually email it over, and they reimburse it if it's in before like Friday at 3. It's reimbursed into our account by Thursday of the next week. So your work pays it, it goes through, you pay it, but then you submit your paychecks and they reimburse it in your account.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like, it's crazy because people don't know about it, but it's such an amazing resource.
No. And thank you, Alicia. Thank you so much for sharing that, because all of us are going to start looking into that. And
Exactly. Yeah. And they want you to because it's more cost effective for, the states and our governments to do that.
and, it,
In the
and
long run. That's the point of it, is trying to save costs. So it helps the Medicaid program because you're helping them save costs while you're getting better insurance for your child.
and
It's a
here I am,
win-win.
I was like, okay, what I did, putting on the New York State insurance for my kids, which actually is better insurance
Oh
than
yeah.
what I'm paying for.
Well,
What
yeah, and that can be the case often because especially when it's the employer. Don't be wrong, employers do pay your insurance, but there's only so much. Like when they buy a plan, they're trying to make what works for the entire company, right? They're not looking at the individual, and unless they are a big corporation like my husband's work, a lot of corporations can't afford that cost because even what we pay, out of pocket. I mean, I think we're like $600 a month about for all around the insurance for the whole family, like for the HIP program pays for it. But it's like that's a fraction of what they pay. So I mean, they're paying, upwards of half a lot of insurance companies. So if you're thinking up to $1,200 a month, that's a lot.
I have some work to do because you would be shocked, and I'm not even going to share it because it's embarrassing what I'm paying for insurance.
It gets costly.
God,
yeah.
It's just you're working for insurance sometimes with one of your jobs. Instant feedback. We're gonna rewind here. We were talking about anxiety a little while ago. Tammy's in Connecticut. She says, I have anxiety. I've not taken medication, but thought about it. But before I do that, are there any herbal or non-medicinal things that you could suggest?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and a lot of the stuff that you can do to bring it down to a manageable level to see if it really is like something that you need medication or not, it's things like finding time for self-care. Because a lot of times it is because we're overworked, we're putting too much, we're giving our kids our all, but not taking care of ourselves first, right? And that's common with us. You hear meditation, and I know a lot of us, our generation above, are like, but really meditation sometimes it's just sitting with yourself. It's not having, it's being present. It's not having like your phone with you, just having time. Like you might be coloring, you might be walking, you might be sitting outside, whatever the case may be, just something to like.
About that. You're on point with that. 100%.
Yeah, just something that just that moment of peace for yourself.
Saying the word meditation, a lot of people say, I can't meditate. I can't. No, it's not about that breathing and getting into that Zen moment. And no, it's more about just drive to the beach, sit there and stare at the water, shut the phone off. Yeah, shut the radio off or music for a moment and just think and just close your eyes and have that time to yourself. And I'll tell you, I did that 2-3 years ago. I had some work to do and I was like, actually, no, I take that back. I was going to the beach, the kayak, and I got there and I'm like, I'm really tired. You know what? I'm just going to sit here. And I did. And then I started doing a little bit of work, but it was enjoyable because I was in a different element. That was 3 years ago, and I still remember it. I could tell you what day it was. I could tell you the angle of the sun. I could tell you where I was parked because it was so beneficial. But we need to do that.
And it's more that grounding yourself. It's what they always talk about, the five senses, which obviously we have more than five, but when you focus on, it's just, what do you see around you? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you feel on the ground? What are you tasting? Because sometimes you're like, oh, I had a soda earlier. I'm still tasting but it gets you in the moment. It takes you away from all the anxiety and stress. And the other thing, my daughter, I know we've talked about before, she drives her crazy how much I push water because she actually has POTS, so she needs extra water than what you need. But all of us think that, taking soda and caffeine, and I'm a victim of it. I mean, look, I'm drinking a soda as we speak, as I say this. But caffeine does the opposite thing for a lot of people. Now, for me, ADHD actually had a reverse effect. But if you're not staying hydrated enough and you're not getting enough just basic water, it's going to lead to everything else. You're not going to get enough sleep. You are going to be more anxious because you're not sleeping, you're not focused, you're getting too much caffeine. That's all you're focused on is this like high cycle energy, and then you crash real hard, and then you can't sleep because you're so anxious. And it's this bad cycle. And so, yeah, just like getting enough water, exercise. I hate it when people tell me exercise. I'm more about, I have conditions that make it hard for me to exercise even, but exercise doesn't always mean go work out in the gym. Sometimes exercise is like go walk to the stop sign and back. Go walk around the backyard with your dog. Go outside and make sure you're doing some stretches and something to get your body moving.
Yep.
You can start small. I mean, yes, it's great. If you're somebody that can go running, absolutely go for it. If I run, I'm going to probably either pee myself or fall on my face. I can't run. That's not going to happen. So it would be a good thing to videotape. It would be funny, but it wouldn't be very beneficial.
Well, what? Send it into America's Funniest Home Videos and you can make some money potentially over that.
Believe me, we should have videotapes around this house outside for all the dumb stuff I've had happen to myself. But just moving, getting out in that fresh air, or just movement, because we're so often sitting in a chair in front of a computer. We're drinking soda because we're exhausted. We're stuck at a computer. We're staring at the screen. We're not moving, and it sends our body in this dormant state. And a lot of us can't avoid that because we're working from home. We're working on our computers. And so it's remembering to take those breaks.
We forget those things, that when you do move your body, not just exercise, but like you said, walk to the stop sign, whatever, you're releasing chemicals inside that will make you feel better. It's unless you do it, you're not going to know it. And that,
it's hard. I will be a person. I have been the person that's been in a severe, deep, major depressive disorder, set. I've been in that part, knowing how hard it is when you are that depressed. One, you need to call a doctor and get some help to start with. But even then, even when you start getting help, it's still hard sometimes. So it is hard to push forward. But sometimes it's just like the little steps, like make those little goals. Go to the mailbox first. Instead of sending the kids, you walk to the mailbox.
Yep.
And make that your routine. And then you're like, oh, well, let me walk down. It can be walking down to 2 houses and back. If that's what you can do, then there's no judgment there. It's what helps you in your situation. But yeah, those little things, just those things that we hear constantly that we all are like, that's just BS. That's what people keep saying. I understand it's hard to do those things, or we overthink it. But once you start making yourself do it, you take that time to say, okay, this next 5 minutes, I'm just going to force through it. It does get better in time. And even people that run marathons, you talk to them, that, these people that can do, ridiculous, marathons, right? And you think, oh, they get up and run and make it easy. No, they'll tell you, it's hard for them to start running. Every time they get to run, it's still hard.
Yeah, it's so true. And there's a phrase that goes like this, and I'm not sure, I'm trying to think of who said it. It might've been The Rock, believe it or, Dwayne Johnson. A bad workout is the one that didn't take place.
Yeah.
There is no bad, as long as you did something, and that's beneficial. I can't believe we're out of time. And
I know we do this all the time.
And we jumped into this like, I don't know, what do you want to talk about? We hit up so many important things today, from anxiety, depression, to check your insurance because Medicaid may pay for your job's insurance. Mind blown right there. To so many tips here. And that's what you're all about. And it is themomkind.com. That's your website. And even though the word mom is in there, you're more of like a lifestyle coach, helping people out, but in a real genuine way. And for that, we love you for it. Alicia, you're available if somebody wants to reach out. The Facebook Messenger link is on your website. And if anybody has a question or needs some help, you're there for them. And thank you. Yeah. Great talking with you again.
Sounds good. Well, I'll talk to you next week.
Yep. And by the way, drink some water or something.
Exactly.
All right. We'll talk soon.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you can now listen live on the MyTuner Radio and online Radio Box apps for iOS, Android, and the Amazon App Store. Or check us out online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com or search Podcast Business News Network on onlineradiobox.com/US so you don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.